Nexus Station floated in the darkness of space like a giant wheel of metal and lights. It orbited a neutral planet called Viridian, far from any single species territory. The station was huge, big enough to house representatives from over 40 different alien species. They all came here to talk, trade, and try to keep peace across the galaxy. This was the heart of the Galactic Assembly, the place where decisions were made that affected billions of lives. Kyle Morrison walked through the curved hallways of the station, his footsteps echoing softly against the metal floors. He was a human diplomat, one of the youngest ambassadors serving at Nexus Station. Kyle had been here for 3 years now, working under Ambassador Helen Carter, learning how to navigate the complex world of galactic politics. It was not easy work. Many of the older species still looked at humans like they were children who had just learned to walk. Humans had only joined the Galactic Assembly 15 years ago. To species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years, humans were newcomers. Some aliens were polite about it. Others made it very clear they thought humans did not belong at the table with the older, more established civilizations. Kyle had learned to smile and stay calm when they talked down to him. Ambassador Carter had taught him that patience was the most important skill a diplomat could have. Today, Kyle was not feeling very patient. He sat in the assembly chamber, a massive room with seats arranged in circles that rose up like stairs. Each species had their own section, designed to fit their particular body types. The human section was small, just a few seats compared to the dozens that some older species occupied. Kyle sat next to Ambassador Carter, watching as the day's session began. The current problem was the Vex Dominion. The Vex were a reptilian species, tall and covered in dark green scales. They had powerful muscles and sharp teeth that they liked to show when they talked. More importantly, they had a strong military. The Vex had been expanding their territory for years, and nobody wanted to stand in their way. They were aggressive, territorial, and they did not care much about the rules that other species followed. For the past 6 months, Vex ships had been stopping human cargo vessels in space. They would board the ships, search them, and often take the cargo, claiming it was illegal or dangerous. The human crews would be arrested and thrown into Vex prisons without any trial. The Vex said they were just enforcing safety regulations. Everyone knew they were just stealing and bullying a species they thought was weak. Ambassador Carter had filed complaint after complaint. She had presented evidence, asked for investigations, and demanded that the Vex follow proper legal procedures. Each time the Vex representative, High Commander Zalthor, would listen with a bored expression on his scaled face. Then he would say something dismissive and nothing would change. The other species in the assembly watched but did nothing. Nobody wanted to anger the Vex over some human shipping problems. Kyle felt his jaw tighten as he watched Zalthor lean back in his seat, looking completely unconcerned. The Vex commander was massive even for his species. His scales were almost black and his yellow eyes seemed to glow in the chamber's light. He wore a military uniform covered in medals and insignia that marked his high rank. Zalthor looked like he could tear a person apart with his bare hands, and Kyle suspected he probably had done exactly that at some point. The session was almost over when a young human officer rushed into the chamber. The sudden movement caught everyone's attention. The officer went straight to Ambassador Carter and whispered something in her ear. Kyle watched as Carter's face went pale. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. Carter stood up slowly. Her voice was steady, but Kyle could hear the anger underneath it. She requested permission to make an emergency statement. The session moderator, a floating jellyfish-like creature, gave her permission. Carter took a deep breath and began to speak. A human medical transport ship had been destroyed. The ship was called the Mercy Light, and it had been carrying 73 people. They were doctors, nurses, and medical staff traveling to help a colony that was dealing with a plague. The ship had been clearly marked with medical symbols. It had sent out identification signals. It had done everything right according to assembly law. A Vex patrol had stopped the ship. The Vex claimed the ship was carrying weapons and refused to let anyone inspect it to prove otherwise. Then, without warning, the Vex had opened fire. The Mercy Light had no weapons, no shield strong enough to protect it. It was destroyed in minutes. All 73 people on board were dead. Murdered, Carter said, her voice breaking slightly on the word. The chamber erupted in noise. Some species shouted in shock. Others whispered to each other. A few, Kyle noticed, looked away as if embarrassed. Kyle sat very still, his hands folded in his lap. He felt cold inside, like someone had dumped ice water into his chest. Ambassador Carter presented the evidence. She showed recordings of the Mercy Light's final transmissions. She displayed the ship's medical certification and the list of supplies it had been carrying, all medicine and medical equipment, no weapons. She read the names of some of the dead, including a doctor named Lisa Grant who had 3 children waiting for her back on Earth. Then Carter looked directly at High Commander Zalthor and demanded justice. She wanted an investigation. She wanted the Vex officers responsible for this attack to be arrested and put on trial. She wanted the Vex Dominion to admit they had killed innocent people and pay compensation to the families. Zalthor listened to all of this without changing his expression. When Carter finished, he stood up. His voice was loud and rough, like gravel scraping against metal. He said that his officers had acted properly. The human ship had failed to stop when ordered. It had been in restricted space. The Vex had every right to defend their territory. Then Zalthor smiled, showing all his sharp teeth. He said that maybe humans should learn to follow orders better. Maybe if humans were not so stubborn and weak, they would not keep getting into trouble. Maybe humans should stick to their own small corner of space and stop bothering species that actually knew how to handle themselves in the galaxy. Kyle felt something snap inside him. He started to stand up, his mouth opening to say something he probably should not say. Ambassador Carter's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She pulled him back down into his seat and leaned close to his ear. "Stand down," she whispered. "That is an order." Kyle obeyed. He sat back in his chair and closed his mouth. But his eyes stayed locked on Zalthor. The Vex commander noticed and stared back, his smile growing wider. To Zalthor, this was funny. He had just admitted to killing 73 innocent people, and he thought it was amusing to see a human get angry about it. Ambassador Carter formally requested an investigation. The session moderator said they would consider it. That was code for "we will talk about it and probably do nothing." Zalthor laughed and walked out of the chamber. Several other Vex followed him, all of them looking pleased with themselves. The session ended. Other diplomats came up to Carter to offer their sympathies. They said things like, "This is very unfortunate, and we hope this can be resolved peacefully." None of them offered to help. None of them condemned the Vex. They were all too afraid. Kyle did not speak to anyone. He walked out of the chamber and headed to a quiet section of the station. There was a memorial hall there, a place where the names of everyone who had died in service to the assembly were recorded on walls made of black stone. The walls glowed softly with thousands of names written in dozens of different languages. Kyle found the human section. It was small, because humans had not been part of the assembly very long. He took out his personal data pad and began entering names. Lisa Grant, Marcus Chen, Patricia O'Connor, all 73 names one by one. As he entered each name, it appeared on the wall in glowing letters. He stood there and read each name out loud, making sure they were remembered. It took him hours. When he finished, it was late into the station's night cycle. Another human crew member found him still standing in front of the wall, just staring at the names. "Are you okay?" the crew member asked. Kyle did not answer for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and calm. "Too calm, no," Kyle said simply. "I am not okay, but I will be." Something in the way he said it made the crew member take a step back. Kyle's face showed no emotion at all. His hands were steady. His breathing was normal. But there was something in his eyes, something cold and determined, that made the crew member suddenly nervous. The crew member mumbled something about getting rest and hurried away. Kyle stood alone in the memorial hall for a while longer. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. He looked like a man who had just made a decision. Somewhere else on the station, in a section where the older species gathered, an insectoid diplomat named Vrix was telling anyone who would listen that something bad was coming. Vrix had seen that look before in ancient records of human wars. It was the look of someone who had been pushed too far. But nobody listened to Vrix. After all, what could one human possibly do against the might of the Vex Dominion? That question would soon be answered, and the answer would terrify the entire galaxy. The morning after the Memorial Hall incident, Ambassador Helen Carter called an emergency meeting of the entire human delegation. There were 12 humans working at Nexus Station, and all of them crowded into the small conference room attached to the human quarters. The room smelled like recycled air and coffee. Everyone looked tired. None of them had slept well after hearing about the Mercy light. Kyle sat near the back of the room. He was quiet, which was unusual for him. Normally, Kyle was one of the more talkative members of the team. He liked to ask questions and offer ideas. Today, he just sat with his hands folded on the table in front of him, listening. Ambassador Carter stood at the front of the room. She looked like she had aged 10 years overnight. Her eyes were red and her usually neat hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She spoke in a flat, tired voice. Earth government had made a decision. They would pursue the matter through proper assembly channels. There would be an official investigation requested. Evidence would be gathered. Diplomatic pressure would be applied. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. It meant months, maybe years of paperwork and meetings. It meant the Vex would delay and deny everything. It meant that in the end, nothing would really happen. Maybe the Vex would get a formal warning. Maybe they would pay a small fine. But the people who ordered the destruction of the Mercy light would never face real consequences. Carter asked if anyone had questions or concerns. Kyle raised his hand. Carter nodded at him. Kyle spoke in a calm, measured voice. He said he understood the decision. He said he would support whatever course of action Ambassador Carter thought was best. He said he trusted Earth government to do what they felt was right. His words were perfect. His tone was professional. But something about the way he said it made Carter feel uneasy. She had worked with Kyle for 3 years. She knew him well enough to recognize when something was wrong. After the meeting ended and everyone else filed out, Carter asked Kyle to stay behind. She closed the door and turned to face him. "Kyle," she said, "are you really okay with this?" Kyle met her eyes. His face showed no emotion. "I understand that diplomacy takes time," he said. "I understand that we have to follow proper procedures. I'm not going to do anything to interfere with the official process." Carter studied his face. Every word he said was technically correct, but something felt off. She could not quite put her finger on what bothered her. Finally, she sighed. "Take a few days off," she said. "You have been working too hard. Get some rest. Maybe visit the station's recreation areas. Clear your head." Kyle nodded. "Thank you, Ambassador," he said. "I think that is a good idea." He left the conference room, leaving Carter standing there with a growing sense of worry that she could not quite explain. Kyle did not go to the recreation areas. Instead, he went to the station's data archives. Nexus Station had one of the most complete collections of information in the known galaxy. Every species that joined the assembly contributed their historical records, technical data, and cultural information. It was all available to diplomats and researchers, organized in massive digital libraries. Kyle spent hours searching through files about the Vex Dominion. He looked up their military structure, their fleet compositions, their base locations. He studied maps of Vex space, noting where their main installations were positioned. He read reports about Vex tactics and strategies. He downloaded information about their ship types and weapon systems. When station security noticed the unusual pattern of data access, they flagged it for review. A security officer contacted Kyle and asked what he was researching. Kyle explained calmly that he was gathering background information for the upcoming diplomatic process. Understanding the Vex military structure would help humans negotiate more effectively. The explanation made sense, and the security officer cleared the flag. But Kyle was not just researching the Vex. He also spent time looking at human military records. These were more restricted, but as a diplomat, Kyle had higher-level access than most civilians. He reviewed specifications for Earth's defense forces. He looked at reports from the few small conflicts humans had been involved in since joining the galactic community. He studied lists of military personnel who had retired from active service and now worked as private security contractors. Over the next week, the situation got worse. The Vex did not stop with the Mercy light. They grew bolder, encouraged by the lack of real consequences. 2 more human cargo ships were seized. The Vex claimed one was carrying illegal weapons. They said the other had entered restricted space without permission. Both claims were lies, but the Vex did not care. They imprisoned the crews and took the cargo. Human colony world started sending urgent messages to Earth. They wanted military protection. They wanted warships to escort their trading vessels. They wanted Earth to do something other than file complaints and wait for investigations that would never produce results. But Earth government continued to urge patience. They did not want to risk a war with the Vex. The Vex military was strong, and a conflict would cost thousands of lives. On Nexus Station, Kyle continued his research. He also started making quiet contact with people. He sent encrypted messages to former military officers. He reached out to security contractors who had served in Earth's armed forces. He made discreet inquiries about the availability of certain equipment and weapons. He did all of this carefully, using private channels and personal connections. Meanwhile, strange things were happening in other parts of the station. Vrix, the insectoid diplomat from the Chitauri hive, kept trying to speak with Ambassador Carter. The Chitauri were an old species, one of the founding members of the Galactic Assembly. They were known for their careful study of other species and their long historical memory. Finally, Carter agreed to meet with Vrix in a private setting. The Chitauri diplomat arrived with several data storage devices. They settled into a secure meeting room, one that blocked all outside monitoring. Vrix's translator device gave their clicking, buzzing speech a worried tone. "Ambassador Carter," Vrix began, "we need to talk about your species. The Chitauri have been watching humans since before you joined the Assembly. We have studied your history carefully. We do this with all species, because understanding the past helps us predict the future. What we have learned about humans is deeply concerning." Carter was surprised. "Concerning how?" she asked. Vrix activated a holographic display and began showing images from human history. There were battles, wars, conflicts spanning thousands of years. Carter started to object, saying all species had violent pasts. Vrix held up a clawed hand to stop her. "That is true," Vrix said, "but humans are different. Most species have a predictable pattern. When they are pushed, they fight. When they are angry, they attack. Their aggression is immediate and obvious. Humans are not like that. Humans can be patient for a very long time. They can endure insults and provocations without responding. But there is a line, and when humans cross that line, something changes." Vrix showed Carter specific examples. There were human commanders who had given final warnings before massive military operations. There were leaders who had tried peace over and over, then suddenly switched to total war. In every case, there was a moment just before the change happened. A moment of absolute calm. A moment where the human in question stopped arguing, stopped pleading, and simply stated that the line had been crossed. "We call it the silence before the storm," Vrix explained. "It is the most dangerous moment with humans. It means they have decided that peaceful options are exhausted. It means they are about to do something terrible. Not out of rage, but out of cold calculation." "Ambassador," I saw that look on Kyle Morrison's face after the assembly session. I have been studying humans long enough to recognize it. Carter felt a chill run down her spine. "You think Kyle is planning something?" she asked. Vrix's translator device made a sound like a sigh. "I think Kyle Morrison has decided that the Vex have pushed too far. I think he is about to prove why older species should fear humans. Please, Ambassador, recall him to Earth. Remove him from this situation before he does something that cannot be undone." Carter wanted to dismiss the warning as paranoid speculation. Kyle was a diplomat, not a soldier. He had no military training, no combat experience. He could not possibly pose a threat to something as powerful as the Vex Dominion. She told Vrix she would keep an eye on the situation, but she was certain there was nothing to worry about. Vrix left the meeting looking troubled. Before departing, the Chitauri offered one final piece of advice. "In our language, there is a saying. The patient hunter is the most dangerous because their prey never sees the strike coming. Your Kyle Morrison has been very patient, Ambassador. I fear his patience has run out." That night, Carter tried to find Kyle to talk with him again. He was not in his quarters. He was not in the human section of the station. His personal communicator was turned off. When she finally tracked him down through station security, she learned he had checked his personal finances and transferred a significant amount of money to various accounts. He had also filed paperwork to purchase a small transport vessel through a civilian broker. Carter stood in her office, staring at the reports. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. Vrix was right. Kyle was planning something. 2 weeks after the destruction of the Mercy Light, the galaxy received news that made even the most hardened diplomats feel sick. A human colony transport ship had vanished. The ship was called the New Horizons, and it carried 500 civilians. These were not military personnel or government officials. They were families, men, women, and children relocating to a frontier colony world to start new lives. Search and rescue teams found the debris field 3 days later. The ship had been torn apart by weapons fire. There were no survivors. 500 people gone in an instant. Among the wreckage, investigators found fragments of Vex missiles and energy weapon signatures. The evidence was clear and impossible to deny. Even worse, human intelligence managed to intercept and decrypt some Vex military communications. The recordings revealed that High Commander Zalthor himself had ordered the attack. In the intercepted messages, Zalthor was laughing. He joked about how weak human ships were, how easy they were to destroy. He said it was a useful lesson to teach humans their place in the galaxy. The Galactic Assembly called an emergency session within hours of the discovery. The assembly chamber was more crowded than usual. Word had spread about the attack, and representatives from species across the galaxy wanted to see what would happen. Some came out of genuine concern. Others came because they sensed this was a historic moment, though they did not yet understand why. Ambassador Helen Carter stood at the human delegation's podium. She looked different than she had 2 weeks ago. The tiredness in her eyes had been replaced by something harder. Her voice was strong and clear as she presented the evidence of the attack. She played the audio recordings of Zalthor laughing about killing 500 humans. She showed images of the debris, including personal belongings that had belonged to children. Carter demanded immediate action. Not an investigation this time. Not a committee or a study group. She demanded that the Galactic Assembly formally condemn the Vex Dominion for war crimes. She demanded that High Commander Zalthor be arrested and put on trial. She demanded that the Vex be expelled from the Assembly until they agreed to follow the same rules as everyone else. The chamber filled with uncomfortable murmuring. Many representatives looked sympathetic. They genuinely felt bad for the humans and what had happened to the New Horizons. But sympathy was not the same as action. The Vex military was powerful. The Vex controlled important trade routes. Starting a real conflict with them would have consequences that rippled across the entire galaxy. One by one, representatives from different species stood to speak. They expressed sorrow for human losses. They suggested forming a special committee to study the incident. They proposed economic sanctions that everyone knew would never be enforced. They offered thoughts and prayers and empty words. Not one of them was willing to directly challenge the Vex. Then High Commander Zalthor arrived. He strode into the chamber like he owned it, his black scales gleaming under the lights. He went to the Vex delegation's area and stood at their podium. He did not look concerned. He looked amused. When the session moderator gave him permission to speak, Zalthor's voice boomed through the chamber. He offered what he called an apology, but his tone made it clear he did not mean it. He suggested that the transport ship had failed to properly identify itself in Vex space. He implied that humans needed to be more careful about where they traveled. Perhaps, he said with a smile that showed all his teeth, humanity was not strong enough to maintain colonies so far from their home world. Perhaps they should stay closer to Earth where it was safer. The message was clear. The Vex could kill humans whenever they wanted and nobody would stop them. A few species representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but none spoke up. The Vex were simply too powerful to challenge. It was easier to let humans absorb the losses than to risk making an enemy of the Vex Dominion. Kyle Morrison had been sitting perfectly still throughout the entire session. He was in his usual seat next to Ambassador Carter, wearing his formal diplomatic uniform. His hands were folded in his lap. His face showed no expression, but his eyes never left Zalthor. He watched the Vex commander with the intensity of a predator studying prey. As Zalthor finished his mocking speech and prepared to sit down, Kyle stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate. Something about it made the entire chamber fall silent. Even the floating jellyfish-like creature that moderated the session seemed to sense that this was important. The moderator recognized Kyle, giving him permission to speak. Kyle walked to the central podium. His footsteps echoed in the silent chamber. Ambassador Carter watched him with growing alarm. She had not authorized Kyle to speak. She had no idea what he was about to say. She started to stand to stop him, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the look on Kyle's face. Maybe it was the absolute certainty in his movements. Kyle reached the podium and stood there for a moment, looking around the chamber. His voice when he spoke was conversational, almost friendly. He thanked the assembly for their time. He expressed humanity's appreciation for all the sympathy and kind words they had received. He acknowledged that the assembly was a place for peaceful discussion and diplomatic solutions. Then Kyle began to review the facts, speaking in that same calm, almost casual tone. 6 weeks ago, the Vex had destroyed the Mercy Light, killing 73 medical personnel. Since then, they had seized multiple human cargo ships and imprisoned their crews. 3 days ago, they had destroyed the New Horizons, killing 500 civilians, including over 100 children. Kyle noted that throughout all of this, humanity had followed proper procedures. They had filed complaints. They had presented evidence. They had respected the Assembly's authority and trusted in diplomatic processes. They had shown remarkable patience and restraint, believing that justice would eventually prevail. As Kyle spoke, several things happened almost simultaneously. The Chitauri ambassador Vrix stood up abruptly in their section, as if preparing to say something. Vrix's translator device was making sounds of distress. Other species representatives who had studied human history began to look alarmed. They recognized something in Kyle's tone, something that made their instincts scream danger. Kyle turned to look directly at High Commander Zalthor. The Vex commander stared back, still smiling. He thought this was just another human complaint, another futile protest. He had no idea what was about to happen. The entire galaxy had no idea what was about to happen. In that same calm, conversational voice, Kyle continued. For weeks, he said, humans have pursued peace. We have shown restraint. We have respected your laws and your processes. We have trusted that the Galactic Assembly would deliver justice. The Vex Dominion has responded by murdering nearly 600 human beings, military personnel, medical staff, and civilians, including children. Kyle paused. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Everyone was holding their breath without quite knowing why. Even the air seemed to have stopped moving. Kyle looked at Zalthor with eyes that were completely calm and completely cold. You have pushed me too far. 7 words, spoken quietly without anger or emotion, just a simple statement of fact. But those 7 words seemed to carry a weight that pressed down on everyone in the chamber. Several species representatives gasped. Vrix made a sound that the translator rendered as a wail of dismay. Ambassador Carter's face went pale. High Commander Zalthor laughed. He actually laughed. He stood up in his section and spread his arms wide in a mocking gesture. What are you going to do about it, little human? He called out. Are you going to file another complaint? Are you going to ask for another investigation? The Vex are not afraid of your words. Kyle did not respond. He simply looked at Zalthor for another moment, his expression unchanged. Then he turned and walked back to his seat. His footsteps echoed in the silent chamber. He sat down next to Ambassador Carter, folded his hands in his lap, and stared straight ahead. The session continued, but nobody was really paying attention anymore. Species representatives were whispering urgently to each other. Intelligence officers were sending rapid messages to their homeworlds. The Chitauri delegation was trying desperately to get anyone to understand what had just happened. As the session ended, Ambassador Carter grabbed Kyle's arm. Her grip was tight, almost painful. We need to talk, she hissed. Now. Kyle nodded calmly. Of course, Ambassador, he said. I understand, but Kyle's eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone who had already made up their mind. They were the eyes of someone who had crossed a line and was not coming back. They were the eyes of a human who had been pushed too far. And in that moment, every species in the galaxy who understood what that meant felt a chill of fear run through them. High Commander Zalthor left the chamber still laughing, still mocking, still convinced of his own invincibility. He had no idea that he had just become the target of something far more dangerous than Vex military might. He had become the focus of human determination, and that was something no amount of scales, teeth, or warships could protect him from. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson that many species had learned throughout history, often too late. You can negotiate with humans. You can trade with them. You can be their friends or their rivals. But there is one thing you should never ever do. Ambassador Helen Carter did not sleep that night. She spent hours digging through records, tracking Kyle's activities over the past weeks. What she found made her blood run cold. Kyle had not been idle during his time off. He had been planning something big, something dangerous, and something that was already in motion. The transport ship Kyle had purchased was not just any civilian vessel. It was a military surplus ship, the kind used by Earth's Special Operations Forces. Kyle had registered it under a fake company name, but Carter's access to human intelligence networks revealed the truth. The ship had been modified with advanced stealth systems, reinforced armor, and weapon mounts. It was not a transport vessel. It was a warship pretending to be one. Even more concerning were Kyle's contacts. He had been communicating with 9 former military personnel. These were not regular soldiers. They were veterans of Earth's most elite units, people with experience in impossible missions and hostile environments. All of them had lost friends or family in the Vex attacks. All of them had volunteered to help Kyle do something that Carter was only beginning to understand. At dawn, Carter went to Kyle's quarters. She did not knock. She used her ambassador override code to open the door. Kyle was inside packing a small bag with personal items. He looked up when Carter entered but showed no surprise. He had been expecting this conversation. "What are you doing?" Carter demanded. Her voice was shaking with anger and fear. "Kyle, you need to tell me right now what you are planning." Kyle finished folding a shirt and placed it in his bag. Then he looked at Carter with those calm, cold eyes. "I am going to deliver justice," Kyle said simply. "Since the Assembly will not do it, someone has to. High Commander Zalthor has killed nearly 600 humans and laughed about it. That cannot stand, so I am going to make him answer for what he has done." Carter felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "You are talking about assassination," she said. "You are talking about starting a war. Kyle, I order you to stand down. Right now. This instant. I will have you arrested if necessary. I will strip your diplomatic immunity and send you back to Earth in chains." Kyle nodded slowly. "I understand, Ambassador. You have to do your job, but I have to do what is right." He walked to a small desk and picked up a datapad. He handed it to Carter. "This contains everything I have planned. All the intelligence I gathered. All my contacts and resources. After I leave, you can give it to station security or Earth government or whoever you think should have it." Carter stared at the datapad, then at Kyle. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "You know it is suicide. Even if you somehow reach Zalthor, you will never make it back. The Vex will hunt you down." Kyle smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I know," he said, "but some things are worth dying for." Those 600 people deserved better than empty promises and diplomatic delays. They deserved justice. "What about the consequences?" Carter pressed. "What about the war this might start? What about all the people who will die if the Vex retaliate?" Kyle's expression hardened. "The Vex are already killing us, Ambassador. They are doing it because they think we are weak. They think we will not fight back. If we let them keep killing humans without consequences, they will never stop. Neither will any other species that decides humans are easy targets." He picked up his bag and slung it over his shoulder. "Sometimes," he said, "the only way to achieve peace is to prove you are willing to go to war. I am sorry it has to be this way. I am sorry you are caught in the middle. But I made my decision. I have been pushed too far, and now there are going to be consequences." Before Carter could respond, Kyle walked past her and out the door. She stood frozen for a moment, then rushed after him. But by the time she reached the corridor, Kyle was already gone. She immediately contacted station security. But they reported that Kyle Morrison and 9 other humans had just departed the station in a private vessel. They were heading into Vex space. News of Kyle's departure spread through diplomatic channels within hours. Warnings were sent to the Vex Dominion that a rogue human element was operating without government authorization. The Vex response was predictable. They laughed. High Commander Zalthor himself sent a message saying he looked forward to capturing the foolish humans and making an example of them. Zalthor made no changes to his security protocols. His flagship, the Dominant Fang, was docked at a major Vex military station for routine resupply. The station was deep in Vex territory, surrounded by patrol ships and defense platforms. Zalthor considered it completely safe. The idea that 10 humans could threaten him there was laughable, but Zalthor and the rest of the Vex military had made a critical mistake. They had dismissed humans based on limited experience. They had never seen what humans were truly capable of when survival and justice were on the line. They were about to receive a very painful education. Kyle's ship approached the Vex military station using stealth technology that was more advanced than anything the Vex had encountered. The ship was small enough to slip past the larger detection grids. When Vex scanners did pick up faint signals, they dismissed them as sensor ghosts or space debris. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, Kyle and his team were already inside the station. The assault on the dominant Fang was surgical and brutal. Kyle's team moved through the station like ghosts, using tactics developed over centuries of human warfare. They hit the ship's external guards first, eliminating them silently before any alarms could be raised. Then they breached the flagship itself, moving with precision that came from weeks of planning and years of military training. The Vex guards inside the ship were caught completely off guard. They were used to straightforward combat, face-to-face battles where superior strength and numbers mattered. Human tactics were different. The humans used ambush, misdirection, and overwhelming force at critical points. They exploited every weakness in Vex security, every gap in their protocols. Within 20 minutes, Kyle's team had fought their way to the command center. Behind them was a trail of dead or incapacitated Vex guards. The humans had moved so fast and so efficiently that the station's main security force had not even realized the flagship was under attack. By the time alarms started going off, it was already too late. High Commander Zalthor was in the command center when the door exploded inward. He spun around, his hand reaching for his weapon, but froze when he saw 10 humans standing there with guns pointed at him. The remaining Vex crew members were quickly subdued. Within seconds, Kyle and his team had complete control. For the first time in his life, Zalthor felt genuine fear. He had faced enemy soldiers in battle. He had stared down rival commanders and political opponents. But there was something different about the humans in front of him. They were not angry. They were not shouting or threatening. They were calm, professional, and absolutely determined. That was somehow more terrifying than rage would have been. Kyle walked forward until he was standing directly in front of Zalthor. The Vex commander was huge, easily twice Kyle's size. But Kyle showed no fear. He looked up at Zalthor with those cold, calm eyes and spoke in a quiet voice. "I am going to give you one chance to explain yourself," Kyle said. "You ordered the destruction of the New Horizons. 500 civilians died, including children. Why did you do it?" Zalthor's fear was slowly being replaced by anger. He was a Vex commander. He did not explain himself to anyone, certainly not to humans. He drew himself up to his full height and snarled. "I did it to teach your species a lesson," he said, "to show you that the Vex are not to be challenged. Your people need to learn their place." Kyle nodded slowly, as if that was the answer he had expected. Then he gestured to his team. They moved with practiced efficiency, securing evidence of Zalthor's orders and crimes. They downloaded data from the command center's computers. They recorded Zalthor's confession. They made sure everything was documented. What happened next would become the subject of debate across the galaxy for years. Kyle and his team delivered consequences to High Commander Zalthor. They did not kill him, though they easily could have. Instead, they did something that the Vex found far more humiliating. They captured him, broadcast his confession across Vex military channels, and left him alive but broken, a symbol of what happened when you pushed humans too far. Then came the part that shocked the galaxy even more than the attack itself. Kyle's team fought their way out. Despite being surrounded by thousands of Vex soldiers, despite being in the heart of enemy territory, the 10 humans escaped. They used guerrilla tactics, traps, and sheer determination. The fighting was fierce and costly, but when it was over, Kyle and all 9 of his team members were gone, vanished into space before the Vex could organize an effective pursuit. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. A small team of humans had struck at the heart of Vex military power, humiliated their most feared commander, and escaped alive. Species that had dismissed humans as weak suddenly began urgent reviews of their intelligence assessments. The Chitauri ambassador sent a message that simply said, "We tried to warn you." The phrase Kyle had spoken in the assembly chamber, "You have pushed me too far," became infamous overnight. It was no longer just words. It was a promise. It was a warning. And now every species in the galaxy knew that when a human said those words. Kyle Morrison and his team returned to Galactic Assembly Space 3 days after their attack on the dominant Fang. They did not try to hide. They did not run to some remote corner of the galaxy. Instead, they flew directly to Nexus Station and requested permission to dock. When station security asked if they were surrendering, Kyle simply replied that they were accepting responsibility for their actions. The galaxy erupted into chaos. The Vex Dominion was screaming for blood. They demanded that Earth government immediately hand over Kyle and his entire team for execution. They threatened war if their demands were not met. They called the attack terrorism, piracy, and an act of war. Their military forces were mobilizing, and many species feared that a conflict between humans and Vex was about to engulf multiple star systems. Earth government was caught completely off guard. They had not authorized Kyle's mission. They had not even known it was happening until it was over. Now they were being blamed for an attack they had no part in planning. Politicians on Earth argued about what to do. Some wanted to condemn Kyle and hand him over to avoid war. Others saw him as a hero who had done what the government lacked the courage to do. The Galactic Assembly ordered Kyle and his team held in custody, pending a formal trial. They were placed in comfortable but secure quarters on Nexus Station. Kyle spent his time reading and writing letters to the families of the people killed in Vex attacks. He showed no regret for what he had done. When asked if he understood the consequences of his actions, he replied that he had understood them completely before he started. The trial became the most watched event in galactic history. Every species sent observers. News networks broadcast every moment. The chamber where the trial was held had to be expanded to accommodate all the interested parties. Kyle and his team stood before the assembly, facing charges of unauthorized military action, assault, and violating dozens of interstellar treaties. The prosecution presented their case efficiently. The facts were not in dispute. Kyle admitted everything. He had planned the attack. He had recruited the team. He had purchased the weapons and equipment. He had led the assault on the dominant Fang. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. By any legal standard, Kyle and his team were guilty. But then the defense began and everything changed. Kyle's legal team, provided by Earth government despite their conflicted feelings, did not try to deny what had happened. Instead, they put the Galactic Assembly itself on trial. They presented evidence of every complaint humans had filed about Vex attacks. They showed how each complaint had been ignored or dismissed. They played recordings of assembly sessions where species representatives had offered sympathy but refused to take action. The defense called witnesses from multiple species who had also been victims of Vex aggression. These species testified that they had tried diplomatic solutions and been ignored, just like humans. The Vex got away with their behavior because everyone was too afraid to stop them. The Assembly, which was supposed to protect all member species, had failed in its most basic duty. Then came the testimony that changed everything. Vrix, the Chitauri ambassador, took the witness stand. The insectoid diplomat's translator device conveyed a tone of both sadness and inevitability. Vrix began by explaining the Chitauri's long study of human history and psychology. They had warned the Assembly, Vrix said. They had tried to make other species understand what humans were capable of when pushed beyond their limits. Vrix presented historical examples from human civilization. There were wars where one side had pushed too hard and faced devastating retaliation. There were conflicts that had started when patient, peaceful people decided that enough was enough. In every case, there was a pattern. Humans would endure, negotiate, and seek peaceful solutions, right up until the moment they decided peace was impossible. Then they would switch to total warfare with a completeness that shocked their enemies. Kyle Morrison's actions, Vrix testified, were not unexpected or aberrant behavior. They were the natural result of pushing a human past the point where peaceful options seemed viable. The Chitauri had seen the warning signs. They had tried to alert the Assembly, but nobody had listened, and now everyone was dealing with the consequences. Vrix made a statement that would be quoted for generations. Humans are genuinely peaceful, the Chitauri said. They prefer cooperation and diplomacy, but this preference should never be mistaken for weakness or inability to fight. When you corner a peaceful species and give them no other choice, they become the most dangerous enemy you could imagine, because they fight not from aggression but from the cold certainty that it is necessary. The trial lasted for weeks. Experts testified about human military capabilities that most species had not taken seriously before. Intelligence agencies presented analyses of human warfare throughout history. The picture that emerged was terrifying to many species. Humans were not weak. They were patient. And patience, combined with capability, made them far more dangerous than any aggressive species. When it came time for Kyle to make his final statement, He stood before the assembly and spoke plainly. He did not apologize. He explained his reasoning in clear terms. The Vex had killed 600 humans. The assembly had done nothing effective to stop it or punish those responsible. Someone had to deliver consequences, or the killing would continue. He had chosen to be that someone, fully aware of the costs. Kyle acknowledged that what he did was technically illegal. He acknowledged that he had violated treaties and protocols. But he asked the assembly a simple question. If your people were being killed and diplomacy had failed and nobody would help, what would you do? Would you continue to trust in a system that had already failed you? Or would you take action to protect those you loved? The verdict, when it finally came, represented a political compromise that satisfied nobody completely, but acknowledged uncomfortable truths. Kyle and his team were found guilty of unauthorized military action. However, their sentence was time already served, with no additional punishment beyond permanent removal from diplomatic service. The assembly acknowledged that their failure to address Vex aggression had created the conditions that led to Kyle's actions. More importantly, the assembly passed sweeping reforms. New protocols were established for investigating attacks on civilian vessels. Mandatory penalties were created for species that targeted non-military ships. The reforms included provisions that would have prevented the Vex attacks if they had existed before. The assembly admitted, though not in so many words, that they had failed humanity and that failure had consequences. The Vex Dominion initially threatened war over what they called an unacceptably light sentence. But their threats rang hollow now. Other species were no longer afraid of the Vex in quite the same way. More significantly, the Vex themselves were afraid of humans. The easy confidence they had shown before was gone, replaced by careful wariness. They had learned that humans, when pushed too far, could strike at the heart of their military power and escape alive. Under pressure from the rest of the galaxy, the Vex issued formal apologies for their attacks on human vessels. They paid substantial reparations to the families of those killed. High Commander Zalthor was removed from command and quietly retired, a broken and humiliated figure. The Vex never again attacked an unarmed human ship. The lesson had been learned, and the cost of teaching it had been high for everyone involved. Kyle returned to Earth after the trial. Public opinion there was divided. Some saw him as a hero who had stood up for human lives when the government would not. Others viewed him as a dangerous vigilante who had risked galactic war. Kyle himself seemed indifferent to both praise and criticism. He had done what he felt was necessary, and that was enough for him. Ambassador Helen Carter visited Kyle one last time before he left Nexus Station. They met in a quiet observation lounge overlooking the stars. Carter admitted that she had been wrong to dismiss the warnings about what Kyle might do. She had not understood the depth of human determination. When justice seemed impossible to achieve through proper channels, she thanked him, quietly and privately, for making the galaxy take humanity seriously. Kyle's response was simple. "I hope it never needs to happen again," he said. "But if it does, other humans will step forward. That is who we are. We prefer peace, but we will not be victims. The galaxy needs to understand that about us." Carter nodded, understanding the truth in his words, even if it made her uncomfortable. Years passed. Kyle settled into a quiet life on Earth, working as a consultant on interspecies relations. The incident became a case study in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. New ambassadors learned to recognize the signs of a species being pushed too far. They learned to take human patience seriously, because patience was not the same as weakness. The phrase "you have pushed me too far" entered multiple languages as an idiom. It meant that a line had been crossed and consequences would follow. Species that had been casually aggressive toward others became more careful. The galaxy became more peaceful, paradoxically, because everyone now understood that even peaceful species had limits. Late in his life, Kyle was interviewed by a young human considering diplomatic service. The student asked what advice Kyle would give. Kyle thought for a long moment before answering.